In the previous 2 videos on the Fear channel, we covered an extensive account of Atlantis' lore. Here we're going to look at the state of the world immediately after Atlantis sank, and how the Atlantean culture and various migrations created a unique set of circumstances in 9564 BC, the year that W. Scott Elliott places the final sinking of Atlantis. All of the major temperate continents of the world are populated at the time Atlantis sank, and have been for many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years by that time. Any tribes of natives living across the entire world are people who have descended from the Lemurians or the Atlanteans. Australia used to be connected to southern Asia, and has shrunk considerably over the aeons. I would imagine that the land that became Australia is where the majority of Lemurian survivors ended up fleeing. From the last video, we know that out of the fall of the Atlantean civilization rose up the people of Egypt. The Arcadians were in Europe and the Middle East. The Mongolians were set up in East Asia. The eastern portions of North and South America were once part of the Atlantean continent, and expanded over the course of hundreds of thousands of years as Atlantis sank due to multiple major flooding events. So the Americas have been populated for hundreds of thousands of years. Right now, the commonly accepted theory for how people came to the Americas is that there was a land bridge between Russia and Alaska some 10,000 years ago. Earlier in 2017, archaeologists found a 14,000-year-old village in British Columbia, Canada, proving that people came here by boat. All stories of the universal flood myth relate back to the sinking of the Atlantean continent. The stories of Noah, Vivasvata Manu, the Epic of Gilgamesh, as well as the flood myths of all native cultures in the Americas, are mythological remembrances of the floods that sank Atlantis. According to Gurdjieff, many Atlanteans escaped the flood by traveling to a place which was at the time called Pearl Land, due to the abundance of pearl-containing clams off its shores. Toward the end days of Atlantis, the Atlanteans had become a rather greedy people, obsessed with obtaining, among many things, more pearls. They had farmed clams to near extinction in the waters surrounding Atlantis. Around the time prior to the sinking of Atlantis, Pearl Land was an Eden-like paradise, with rich soil and plentiful seafood, so many Atlanteans who traveled to the location never left. The Pearl Land of roughly 10 millennia ago is modern-day India. At its height, Atlantis had canals and land passages that connected Africa to the Americas. At the time, Africa was a much smaller continent, known then as grabontzi. Africa grew in size tremendously after the Atlantean epic came to an end. As Atlantis sunk beneath the waves, land rose up out of the waters in many places across the world, and Africa was one such land beneficiary. During the time of Atlantis, caravans from northern Grabontzi would travel across the entirety of what is now the Atlantic Ocean to come to the Americas. Olmec statues are one of the primary evidences of this. If you look at a picture of an Olmec, you will see that the faces have characteristically African features. These statues were built in honor of initiates of the mysteries, who traveled across the world to learn and spread knowledge. The banana and the plantain are also evidence of these migrations, since bananas and plantains originally grew in Africa. Thanks almost entirely to the writings of Gurdjieff, we still have a number of words from the Atlantean language, as Gurdjieff uses Atlantean words constantly throughout his book, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. If you are interested in learning fragments of the Atlantean language, I highly suggest you read that book. Heptaparaparshinokh is a term meaning divine law of 7. This term, along with others that I will be presenting, are complex to say the least, and could have an entire video dedicated to each. So for the sake of brevity, I'll just be giving you the gist of these Atlantean terms. Heptaparaparshinokh is sometimes referred to as the law of octaves. This law explains how all processes proceed in 7 stages, and eventually end on an 8th stage, which is the start of a new octave from which the process continues forth. Music and color are the best examples of this law in action. Really, anything that vibrates is subject to the process of this law. And since everything vibrates, it is universal. This law is also the reason that planets are given 7 root races before becoming defunct, and why each of those 7 root races have 7 sub-races. Triamazikamno is a term meaning divine law of 3. It states that anything that exists consists of 3 parts, namely an active part, a passive part, and a neutral part. It is most easily seen in the construction of atoms and the transference of electricity. Using hept as a suffix for 7 and tri as a suffix for 3 comes directly from the Atlantean language. Poisonioonoskirian is an Atlantean term meaning poisonous energy, a term that I'm sure was used in relation to the actions of the Turanian people often. From it, we derive our modern word for poison. Bobbin-Kandelnosts are another Atlantean concept of note. They are a measurement of life force energy in all living things that is parceled out at birth. When a person runs out of Bobbin-Kandelnosts, they die. Beelzebub's Tales goes into detail about how one can conserve their Bobbin-Kandelnosts and live a longer, healthier life. From it we get 2 modern words, the word for bobbin in relation to textiles, and the word candle. Bobbins hold a set amount of yarn or thread, and eventually are used up. Likewise, candles hold a set amount of time for their use, determined by the thickness of the wick and the amount of wax. Candles have often been used to reference the duration of a person's life. For an instance of that, you can listen to my recording of Godfather Death by the Brothers Grimm. Now that we've covered some Atlantean words, let's look more into their writing and culture, and how it disseminated into the languages and cultures of today. As mentioned, the Atlanteans built pyramids, and some groups of them wrote in hieroglyphic. Prior to the sinking of Atlantis, some survivors escaped west towards the Americas, while others headed east towards locations in Africa, Europe, and Asia. This is why native tribes in North and South America also built pyramids. While people tend to be more familiar with Mayan pyramids, many are not aware that multiple tribes living prior to the colonization of the United States built pyramids out of wood, silt, and clay. Monk's Mound in Illinois is one such example. This structure was one of many built by the Mississippi tribe. The Mississippi built these pyramids in their cities, and yes, native tribes in North America had cities. The Mississippi tribe developed efficient agricultural techniques and were able to sustain a large population primarily on squash, pumpkins, and green beans. Monk's Mound is the largest of 120 pyramid remnants left behind from the Mississippi city of Cahokia. At its height, Cahokia covered 6 square miles and would have stood a long time had the region not flooded sometime around 1300 AD. The mound is no longer as tall or great a structure as it once was, since the dirt has eroded over the past few centuries. But this and other similar mounds across North America are evidence of native North American pyramid building practices. This connection to Atlantis is also the reason why hieroglyphic writing is found in both Mayan and Egyptian pyramids. The specific symbols used in the 2 cultures' respective writings are different, and this is probably due to the presence of different flora and fauna between Central America and Egypt, since hieroglyphic writing relies on using animals and plants as symbols. In spite of this, the way the writing is formatted in both cultures is eerily similar, regardless of the potential language evolution that most likely occurred over the course of several thousands of years. The ancient Chinese, as well as other East Asian cultures, also used pyramid structures for their burial tombs, that closely resemble the pyramids of Central America. The one pictured is the tomb of the general in Jian, China. Looking more towards written language, the Naji people of China and Tibet, who descended from nomadic tribes living in ancient pre-dynastic China, used a pictographic written language called Dongba, which is similar to hieroglyphics. An Atlantean ancestry could be the reason why so many written languages in Asia have thousands of characters, if the languages evolved from the many symbols used in Atlantean hieroglyphics.